So in 1962, NASA's Mariner 1 rocket lifted off from Cape Canaveral.
Right, headed for a historic flyby of Venus.
Exactly. I mean, it was this massive triumph of modern engineering, but then less than 5 minutes into the flight, the rocket just starts veering wildly off course.
Like completely out of control.
Yeah, threatening to crash right back down into a populated area. So the range safety officer, he really had no choice. He had to hit the self-destruct button and just blow the spacecraft to pieces over the Atlantic.
Which is just wild to think about. I mean, the cost of that explosion, $18 million.
And that's in 1962 money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the craziest part is the cause of the failure. It wasn't, a faulty engine or like a bad fuel line.
No, it was a typographical error.
Literally a typo.
A single missing hyphen in the handwritten mathematical code that got transcribed into the guidance computer. That one little missing horizontal line, it told the computer to ignore normal radar variations, which caused the rocket to violently overcorrect.
Just a tiny line of ink.
Right. And well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled to have you with us because today we are actually looking at this highest stakes invisible architecture in the world, the rules of typography and copy editing.
It's just a perfect example of how we take the physical shapes of our written language entirely for granted until they fail us.
Oh, totally.
We operate under this illusion that reading is just this frictionless, transparent process. Like we're looking through a perfectly clean window, just downloading an author's thoughts directly into our brains.
We really don't want to think about the plumbing.
No, not at all.
But the moment you step into the world of professional layout or editing or typography, that window is suddenly covered in fingerprints and scaffolding and structural blueprints.
It's everywhere.
It is. So we are taking a magnifying glass to Chapter 3 of the Graphic Design Reference Plus Specification book today. This chapter really focuses on the unsung hero of great design, which is proofreading and copywriting conventions.
The secret matrix, basically.
Yeah, our mission for today's deep dive is to uncover this invisible rulebook. The rules that dictate how information is actually structured on a page. We want to turn you, the listener, from a casual reader into a typographical detective.
Somebody who can spot the matrix of printed text everywhere they look.
Exactly. Because once you see the underlying mechanical architecture, how text is arranged and formatted and corrected, it completely changes your relationship with the written word.
It really does. You start to realize that every single millimeter of what you read in a professionally published book or, a magazine is governed by a highly regimented, almost ruthlessly logical system.
And before we jump into the absolute microscopic details of the system, I do want to explicitly remind you, if you want to keep gaining knowledge quickly and thoroughly, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And if you want to have a physical copy of the book we're diving into today, which honestly is basically the definitive survival guide for this kind of structural design work, you can either scan the QR code on your screen or just find the book link below.
Highly recommended.
So let's start with the absolute raw data of our world. Numbers.
The foundational blocks.
Right, because before we can even talk about editing a beautiful magazine layout, we really have to understand the foundational rules of how raw quantities are written down.
And numbers are uniquely disruptive when they sit in a block of text.
How so?
Well, they function differently than letters, right?
Yeah.
Both logically and visually. When you're reading a narrative, your brain is processing language. But the moment a numeral appears, your brain has to physically shift gears to process a mathematical symbol.
Oh, that makes sense. It creates friction.
Exactly. That shift pulls the eye.
So the source gives us a very specific set of guidelines to manage that friction. First up is what we can call the under 10 rule.
Right, a classic.
The guideline states that generally in narrative text, you should spell out cardinal and ordinal numbers below 10. So you write out the letters FOUR for 4 days.
Yeah, you stole it out.
But you use figures, like actual Arabic numerals, for numbers 10 and up. So you use the digit 1 and the digit 5 for 15 people.
Which is such a specific cutoff.
It is. At first glance, picking the number 10 as the cutoff feels completely arbitrary. I mean, why not spell out everything under 20?
Well, it actually comes down to the physical anatomy of the typography.
The anatomy.
Yeah, think about the lowercase letters in a standard book font. They have a rhythm. Let's use a physical analogy here. Think of a lowercase h and a lowercase y.
Okay, an H and a Y.
The vertical stick of the H reaches up into the attic of the line, right? Typographers call that an ascender. And the tail of the Y hangs down into the basement. That's a descender.
Right, right.
This up and down variation creates this varied skyline that the human eye just glides across very easily.
Oh, wow. But numbers don't do that, do they?
No, they don't. A 3, a 4, a 5, they don't usually go into the attic or the basement. They were like little solid bricks.
Bricks on the floor.
Exactly. They sit heavy and square right on the floor, which we call the baseline. So if you drop a bunch of those dense solid bricks into a line of elegant flowing letters, the reader visually trips over them.
That makes so much sense. So spelling out small numbers like 1, 2, or 3 keeps the visual texture smooth.
Right. The word to has a nice ascender on the T. It blends in. It respects the visual rhythm of the sentence.
But then once you hit 10, the logic flips.
Right.
Because of horizontal space, right?
Exactly. Spelling out 74 or 123, it just takes up so much physical real estate on the line.
The word itself becomes a roadblock.
Yes. The physical length of the word becomes more disruptive than the density of the digits. So the economy of space overtakes the need for visual rhythm. The rule is basically balancing cognitive load against visual space.
Okay, but there are exceptions to this matrix, obviously. The source explicitly states you must always spell out a number if it begins a sentence, even if it's over 10.
Always.
So if I write 15 people enter the house, I am forced to spell out F-I-F-T-E-E-N.
Yes, because a capital letter is the universal visual signal that a new thought is beginning.
Oh, and you can't capitalize a number.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Arabic numerals cannot be capitalized. They only have one case. So if you start a sentence with a digit, you strip away that critical visual cue that the previous sentences ended.
The reader just gets lost in the microscopic space between the period and the next thought.
They really do.
But then, okay, the source throws a curveball that overrides everything we just talked about.
Oh, the measurements rule.
Yes. Weights, measures, figure numbers, times, and dates should always be stated numerically, no matter what, even if the number is under 10.
Right.
So it's always the digit 3 miles or the digit 2 hours. Why the shift there?
Because those are precise data points.
Yeah.
When you introduce a measurement, the reader is no longer in narrative mode.
They shift gears.
Yeah, they are suddenly in analytical mode. A numeral communicates precision, much faster than a spelled out word. When you see a digit next to a unit of weight or time, your brain instantly categorizes it as hard data.
Data that needs to be calculated rather than just a descriptive adjective.
Precisely.
Well, I have to stop you there and push back on the next rule in the book because this one just feels incredibly pedantic to me.
Uh-oh. Which one?
It's the sequence rule. The source says that when two numbers are next to each other, you have to switch formats to avoid confusion.
Oh, right.
The example they give is, he filled 12 8-ounces glasses, that's the numeral 12, followed immediately by the spelled out word 8, followed by as.
Yes, a classic typographical hurdle.
But I mean, are readers really going to be confused if we just write 12 8-ounce glasses with numerals? Is the cognitive load really that high, or are typographers just being snobs here?
Well, it's not snobbery at all. It's actually a deep understanding of how human vision works.
Okay, defend it.
When we read, our eyes don't smoothly pan across a line of text like a video camera. They make these tiny, rapid jumps called saccades, pausing for just milliseconds to absorb chunks of visual information.
So we process shapes and clusters, not individually letter by letter.
Exactly. So think about what happens in your visual cortex when the eye lands on the numerals 12 and 8 right next to each other.
Oh.
For a split second, your brain doesn't see a quantity of 12 and a capacity of 8. It tries to parse the single integer 128.
They just visually blur together into one unrecognizable data point.
Right.
128-ounce glasses. Wow, that changes the story entirely. You've suddenly given the character a swimming pool of water instead of a tray of drinks.
It creates a syntactic traffic jam. By forcing the switch, using the numeral 12 and spelling out the word 8, the designer is engineering a necessary visual break.
It's like a speed bump.
A speed bump that physically separates the quantity from the attribute. It demands slightly more effort from the writer, sure, but it drastically reduces the friction for the reader.
It protects the reader from their own brain's tendency to group shapes together. That makes the rule feel much less like a punishment and more like, a protective railing.
Exactly.
And speaking of protecting the text, there's a vital rule about plurals in the source. And it is absolute on this. Add an "es" to numerals and dates to pluralize them, with no apostrophe.
Yes.
So the examples are 1950s, 70s, B-52s. This addresses the dreaded greengrocer's apostrophe, right? When someone writes 1950 apostrophe S.
Oh, it's everywhere. People seem to have this intense anxiety about pluralizing numbers.
Why do you think that is?
It is a massive hypercorrection. people feel uncomfortable mashing a lowercase letter directly against a numeral, it just feels visually wrong to them because, as we discussed, numbers and letters operate on different visual baselines.
Right, the bricks versus the skyline.
So they instinctively throw an apostrophe in there as a buffer, just a way to keep the letter and the number from touching.
But an apostrophe has very specific, non-negotiable jobs in English. It indicates possession, like the dog's bone, or it indicates omission, like don't for do not.
Right. And the 1950s do not own anything in that sentence.
And we haven't omitted any letters between the 0 and the es.
Look at the apostrophe purely as a graphical element for a second. It's a heavy ink mark floating near the ascender line. When you use it incorrectly to pluralize a decade, it physically pushes the es away from the numeral.
It creates a gaping hole in the middle of the word.
It destroys the tight, cohesive block that the text is supposed to form. 1950s with no apostrophe is visually superior because it maintains structural integrity.
Interestingly, though, the source does show an apostrophe in the second example, apostrophe 7 zeros for 70s.
But notice where that apostrophe is placed.
It precedes the 7.
Yes, it's an apostrophe of omission. It's standing in for the 19 that was chopped off. So it's doing its actual job showing a contraction of the decade rather than masquerading as a pluralizer.
Let's expand on this punctuation micro-universe, because the prompt points us toward the rules for hyphenation, dashes, and quote marks. We saw how a missing hyphen doomed the Mariner 1.
Right, the most expensive typo in history.
The source outlines a strict hierarchy between the hyphen, the n dash, and the m dash. And let's be honest, most people typing on a keyboard just hit the key next to the 0 and call it a day.
And that is because the typewriter actually destroyed public understanding of typography.
Really?
Yeah, a typewriter had limited keys, right?
Yeah.
So it used one single horizontal mark for everything. But in professional typesetting, there are 3 distinct tools.
Okay, let's break them down. The hyphen is the shortest mark.
Right. Its job is purely structural. It acts as glue. It holds compound words together, like mother-in-law. Or it ties a word across a line break at the edge of a page.
Then you step up in width to the n dash.
The n dash is physically wider. Traditionally, it's the exact width of a lowercase n in whatever font you're using.
Hence the name.
Exactly. And its job is not to glue, but to act as a bridge. It indicates a range or a span of time. You use an n dash for 1990 to 2000 or pages 10 through 15. It visually represents the passage from one point to another.
And finally, the undisputed king of punctuation, the m dash.
Oh, the m dash. It is the width of a capital M. It is wide, it is bold, and its job is to interrupt.
It represents a sudden break in thought, right?
Yes, a dramatic pause or an aside. Using a tiny little hyphen when you mean to use a dramatic m dash is like whispering when you're supposed to be shouting. It completely fails to convey the necessary visual weight of the interruption.
The source also distinguishes between prime marks and quotation marks, which I assume is another casualty of the typewriter era.
A massive casualty. This is a constant battle for graphic designers. Real quotation marks, typographers call them smart quotes, are curly.
They are asymmetrical.
Right. The opening quote looks like tiny 66s, and the closing quote looks like tiny 99s. They cup the dialogue, visually holding the spoken words together.
But the typewriter couldn't afford 2 separate keys for opening and closing quotes, right? So it introduced dumb quotes, just perfectly straight vertical hash marks.
And those straight vertical marks already have a job. They are prime marks, and they are strictly used for measurements.
Like feet and inches.
Exactly. A single prime mark means feet, and a double prime mark means inches. So 5'10" is written with prime marks. The problem today is that word processing software tries to be too helpful.
Oh, I know where this is going.
If a designer types out 5'10" using prime marks, the software often autocorrects them into curly smart quotes.
So you end up with a piece of lumber that is 5 opening quote, 10 closing quote long.
Which just looks completely amateurish. The designer has to manually go in and strip out the smart quotes to restore the mathematical prime marks. It's a perfect example of why you cannot just rely on automated software. You really have to know the underlying matrix.
Speaking of things that require absolute precision, let's talk about how we regulate something as abstract as time.
Time is tricky.
Because the rules shift slightly when dealing with the temporal. We are moving from physical objects to absolute chronology. The source dictates that when designating an hour of the day, we use figures for clock time followed by AM and PM.
Again, time is a specific measurement. We need the immediate, dense visual recognition of the Arabic numeral.
But then the source addresses the absolute trickiest moment of the day, 12:00.
Oh, the paradox.
The rule dictates that midnight, noon, 12.00 midnight or 12 noon are preferred. You must never, ever use 12 p.m. or 12 a.m.
Right, and it all goes back to the Latin roots of our timekeeping system. AM stands for antemeridium, meaning before midday. PM stands for postmeridium, meaning after midday.
And midday is exactly noon.
Yes. So logically, noon cannot be before itself and it cannot be after itself.
They are logical paradoxes.
Yeah.
12 a.m. and 12 p.m. are technical impossibilities.
Exactly. 12.0 is the axis upon which the day turns. It is the meridian itself.
And midnight is just as problematic, isn't it? Because it exists on the boundary line between two dates.
Is midnight the final moment of Tuesday or the very first moment of Wednesday?
Right. Legal systems, insurance companies, and airlines have suffered massive headaches over contracts expiring or flights departing at 12 a.m. because of that inherent ambiguity.
The typographical rule insists on the words noon and midnight because it completely removes that legal and logistical ambiguity. Typography is literally solving legal disputes by forcing clarity.
That is wild. And we see that Latin influence again when we move from the hours of the day to the scope of human history.
The historical time rules.
Yes. The text says, use AD preceding the year with no comma. So AD 2004. Use BC following the year with no comma. So 115 BC. This is a massive trivia trap. Why does AD go in front but BC goes behind? It feels incredibly inconsistent.
It feels inconsistent till you translate the terms out of their abbreviations. BC is an English abbreviation. It stands for before Christ.
Okay.
Grammatically, in English, you would say 115 years before Christ.
Yeah.
The abbreviation follows the numbers seamlessly.
Wait, if AD is Latin, does that mean the abbreviation placement is actually just preserving a 2,000-year-old grammatical rule?
Exactly. AD stands for Anno Domini, which translates to in the year of our Lord.
Oh.
So if you write 2004 AD, what you are literally writing is 2004 in the year of our Lord. Syntactically, that's gibberish. You don't have 2004 units of the year.
You have to put the prepositional phrase first.
Right. AD 2004 reads as in the year of our Lord 2004.
We are placing modern Arabic numerals on a page in a specific sequence in the 21st century solely to obey the grammatical syntax of a dead language. That is the invisible scaffolding at its absolute finest.
It really is.
And it explicitly notes no commas with either of these, just AD 2004.
Because a comma creates an unnecessary visual pause. It separates the era from the year. For the reader to grasp the historical context instantly, the era and the year need to function as a single, unified, uninterrupted data point.
There is also a very strict rule about time-related abbreviations. Things like sectus, min, HR, WK, mo, and even days and months like January, February, and Natsus.
The table rule.
Yeah, the book states, use abbreviations in tables and charts only. Spell out in all other situations.
This really highlights the eternal battle between spatial economy and narrative flow.
How do you mean?
Well, when you are designing a table or a chart, your absolute highest priority is spatial geometry. You are trying to fit dense comparative data into a tight, highly restrictive grid.
Right.
If you have a column header that says Wednesday, the word itself might be physically wider than the data living beneath it. That ruins the grid. So the abbreviation WED becomes a structural necessity. The abbreviation serves the architecture of the table.
The grid is king.
Exactly. But in narrative body text, space is less restricted, and the priority shifts back to maintaining that immersive reading experience. If you are reading a novel and the sentence says, he waited 3 HR and 15 minutes on twos, the immersion just shatters.
It feels stunted. You suddenly feel like you're reading a technical manual.
The abbreviations are too visually abrasive for a story.
It's almost like code switching. The text has to behave differently depending on what sort of room it's sitting in on the page. In the narrative room, it dresses formally and spells everything out. In the data table room, it puts on a hard hat and abbreviates everything to fit into the grid.
That is a fantastic way to conceptualize it.
Okay, so up to this point, we've talked about how the text should ideally be written. Perfect numbers, mathematically precise dashes, grammatically accurate time designations.
The ideal world.
But what happens when things go wrong? When an editor is reviewing a printed manuscript and spots a mistake, they can't write a whole paragraph in the margins explaining the Latin roots of Anno Domini.
No, they need a hyper-efficient way to communicate the fix to the designer. They need shorthand.
An entire visual vocabulary that exists solely to modify other visual vocabulary.
It's a meta language.
This brings us to Section 3, the secret handshake of editors, the Proofreaders Symbols. Looking at the source images provided in the book, I always compare these symbols to a baseball coach giving hand signs to a batter.
Well, like that.
Right. It's a quick, universally understood physical gesture that dictates a complex maneuver without a single word being spoken. There is a fascinating, almost violent physical logic to these shapes. Let's walk through some of the core commands.
Let's do it.
First is delete or take out. The symbol is a swooping loop. It looks a bit like a lowercase cursive D, but the top stem pulls down and crosses completely over itself.
It's a very satisfying symbol to deploy, honestly. The loop physically circles the offending letter or word in the text, and the long tail pulls it away into the margin.
It is an action captured in ink.
It literally mimics the physical motion of scooping something out of the text and throwing it in the trash.
Then we have insert. The symbol is a caret, just an inverted V or like a little arrow pointing up from the baseline into the space where the new text belongs.
The caret is brilliant because it's infinitely precise. It targets the exact micromillimeter between two letters where the insertion needs to happen.
It acts as a wedge.
Yes, visually forcing the existing text apart to make room for the new data.
There's one here for space. If you want to add a space between two words that have been run together, you put the caret wedge in the text and you draw a hash mark in the margin, like a tic-tac-toe board, or what everyone today calls a hashtag.
Right.
Why a hash mark for empty space?
This is a ghost of the physical printing press living on in red pen. In the days of metal type, if you wanted a space between words, you didn't just leave it empty.
Because the blocks would slide.
Exactly. You had to insert a physical blank block of lead into the printing frame so the words wouldn't slide together. Those blank blocks were called quads.
Oh.
The hash mark visually represents looking down at that physical rectangular block of metal from above. The cross-hatching is the physical mass of the empty space being dropped into the line.
That is incredible. A symbol for nothingness based on a heavy piece of metal? What about begin new paragraph?
The symbol for a new paragraph is called a pilcrow.
Yeah.
It's like a capital P with two vertical stems, or sometimes just a heavy reversed bracket.
It's a very distinct shape.
Think of it like a shepherd's crook. The heavy loop grabs the sentence, and the thick vertical stems act as a solid wall, physically forcing the text block downward and inward to create the indentation. It's a structural command to break the masonry of the text block.
The source also shows several letter codes written inside ovals. We have an oval with SP inside.
That stands for spell out. If an author incorrectly wrote the numeral 5 at the beginning of the sentence, the proofreader circles it and writes SP in an oval in the margin.
It tells the designer to execute the rule we discussed earlier. Change the symbol 5 to the letters FIVE.
Precisely.
We have TR in an oval, which stands for transpose. This is usually accompanied by a winding line over the text itself that looks like an S lying on its side.
It physically shows the letters swapping places, twisting around each other.
And then there are the direct formatting commands for the typeface itself. WF stands for wrong font, LC is lowercase, UC is uppercase, BF is boldface, ITAL is italics, and ROM, which stands for Roman.
Right. In typography, Roman just means standard upright text. Not italicized, not slanted, just normal, standing straight up.
So if a word is incorrectly italicized, the editor writes ROM to command the typesetter to stand the text back up to its normal posture.
Exactly.
Let's look at how they handle punctuation marks in the margins. The source shows that if you want to insert a period, you don't just put a dot in the margin, you draw a dot and then draw a heavy circle entirely around it. The ellipsis is similar, 3 dots, all enclosed in one big oval.
Think about the environment of a heavily edited manuscript. There are stray pen marks, smudges, coffee rings.
A solitary dot in the margin could just be a speck of dust or a fly speck.
Right, so by circling it, the editor is demanding attention. The circle isolates the mark and says, this is absolutely, definitely a period. Put it precisely here. It elevates the punctuation mark above the background noise of the paper.
We also have layout commands. A bracket opening to the right means move right, and a bracket opening to the left means move left, and an oval with the word align.
Those brackets act like snowplows. If a margin is ragged and a line sticks out too far, the bracket is a visual wall shoving the text back into its proper vertical alignment.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though.
Go for it.
I look at all these beautiful hand-drawn loops and carets and hash marks. In an era of Google Docs, Microsoft Word, digital tracking, and collaborative cloud editing, isn't this physical shorthand totally dead? I mean, are people really still drawing brackets on pieces of paper? I haven't seen an editor use a red pen in 10 years.
It's true that the physical act of drawing these symbols on dead trees is becoming rare. We use track changes now. But the concepts these symbols represent are the very architecture of modern digital design software.
The analog rules became the digital code.
Exactly. When you open InDesign or Microsoft Word, the strict mathematical difference between an M- and an N- is hard-coded into the software. The command to transpose letters, the necessity of aligning baseline text, the automatic insertion of a pilcrow when you hit the Enter key, these are all functions operating invisibly in the background.
So the symbols are still there, just hidden.
The software you use every day was built by programmers who had to translate these exact analog symbols into digital algorithms. Understanding the symbol isn't just a history lesson, it's understanding the fundamental logic of the software.
Which brings me to my absolute favorite symbol on this entire list, the ultimate override. The source shows a large oval, and inside is the word STET. S-T-E-T.
Ah, STET. It is Latin for let it stand.
I love the idea of STET. Imagine an editor crosses out a whole paragraph, draws aggressive loops and carets everywhere, and completely rewrites the author's sentence in the margin. And then reading it back, the editor realizes, actually, the author had it right the first time, my edit made it worse.
But they've already ruined the paper with red ink.
They can't erase ink, so they put a series of dots under the crossed-out text, circle it, and write STET in the margin. It is a command to the typesetter that supersedes all other commands. It means, ignore the destruction I just caused, revert to the original.
It's the original analog Shift plus Z, the physical undo button.
It's an incredibly powerful concept because it acknowledges human error within the editing process itself. It's the system having a built-in mechanism for humility.
It proves that the matrix isn't just about rigid rules. It has a release valve for second thoughts.
So proofreaders clean up the main narrative text using those symbols. They fix the spelling, shove the margins into place, and ensure the dashes are mathematically perfect. But graphic design also requires managing the meta text, right?
The tiny details living on the extreme fringes of the page.
Exactly. How do we keep the main text from collapsing under the weight of its own citations? This brings us to the basement of the page. Footnotes.
The foundation.
I compare footnotes to the concrete foundation of a house. It's at the very bottom. It's not the most glamorous part to look at. Nobody buys a house just to stare at the concrete slab. But it does all the heavy lifting for the credibility of the entire structure above it.
If the footnotes are messy, the whole argument feels unstable.
Exactly. The footnote anchors the theoretical text above to the external factual reality below. And because it serves such a vital structural role, its formatting is totally inflexible.
Unforgiving.
The source is delightfully rigid about how these are formatted. First rule, notes and footnotes always end with periods, even if they do not form complete sentences. But right next to that it states, source lines do not end in periods.
It seems like a contradiction, doesn't it?
If they are both sitting at the bottom of the page, why does one get a period and the other doesn't? A footnote might just be a last name and a year, Smith, 1999, which is not a sentence, but it demands a period.
It comes down to the psychology of punctuation and visual gravity.
Visual gravity.
Think about what a period actually does visually on a page. It acts as a heavy, physical full stop. When a reader's eye travels down a page of text, it's essentially falling. It hits the bottom margin.
Okay, I'm visualizing that.
A footnote is a distinct supplementary thought. By placing a heavy period at the end of it, even if it's just 2 words, you are telling the reader's eye that this distinct thought is anchored. It is complete.
It prevents the text from feeling like it's just floating off the bottom edge of the paper into the abyss.
Exactly. It's like putting a cap on the end of a pipe. It stops the visual flow.
That makes total sense. It provides terminal closure.
A source line, on the other hand, is usually just a direct credit living right under an image or a specific chart-like source, U.S. Census Bureau.
It functions as a label, not a supplementary thought.
Right. Labels don't need closure in the same way. They just sit adjacent to the object they describe. Slapping a heavy period at the end of a short label feels abrupt, jarring, and visually unnecessary.
And then there's the sequence. The source dictates a strict, non-negotiable sequence when you are listing more than one footnote on a single page using symbols instead of numbers. It goes first footnote, second footnote, third footnote, fourth footnote.
The asterisk, the dagger, the double asterisk, the double dagger.
Right. If you have 4 notes on a page, you must use those symbols in that exact order. But why use these bizarre medieval weapons and stars at all? Why not just use numbers? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Numbers are generally preferred today, sure, but this symbolic hierarchy evolved centuries ago. because early printers ran into a massive problem when setting math or science books.
Oh, because of the equations.
Exactly. If the main text of the book is already filled with numbers and equations, adding tiny superscript numbers for footnotes creates disastrous confusion.
The reader doesn't know if the tiny 2 means go to the bottom of the page or square this equation.
So printers turn to these specialized typographical marks that have zero mathematical value.
The asterisk is the star. It's the primary beacon.
It catches the eye easily. The dagger, which literally looks like a small sword pointing down, is the secondary mark. Its origins go back to monastic scriptoriums.
That is so cool.
Then you double up the asterisk for the third and double up the dagger for the fourth. It's an elegant, universally agreed upon sequence.
So if a modern designer tries to get creative and uses a dagger for the first footnote on a page,
Any traditional typesetter looking at it will instantly feel a sense of profound dissonance. It violates the architecture. It's like wearing your shoes on the wrong feet. It might functionally cover your toes, but everyone knows it's wrong.
while we are talking about the extreme edges of the page, let's look at another rule the source covers: hanging punctuation. This is a concept that blows the minds of young graphic designers when they first learn it.
Oh, it's a game changer.
The rule dictates that punctuation marks at the beginning or end of justified line of text, like a quotation mark or a hyphen, should hang outside the margin.
This touches on the difference between mathematical alignment and optical alignment.
Break that down for me.
If you draw a strict vertical line down the left side of a page, and you align a heavy capital WA right up against that line, it looks solid. But if the next paragraph starts with a quotation mark, and you align that quotation mark mathematically to the exact same vertical line, the paragraph will look like it's indented.
Because the quotation mark is mostly empty space. It doesn't have the visual mass of a W.
Precisely. The eye perceives the negative space around the quote mark as an indentation. To make the margin look perfectly straight to the human eye, the designer has to grab that quotation mark and physically push it outside the boundary, hanging it into the empty margin.
The solid letter following the quote mark then aligns with the W above it.
Yes, the typography is mathematically crooked, but optically perfect.
It's an optical illusion designed to soothe the brain. Okay, we have organized time, we have disciplined our numbers, we have mastered the editor's physical shorthand, and we've anchored the basement of our pages. Finally, we move to the macro level, standardizing the physical world.
The big stuff.
How do copywriters and graphic designers take the vast, chaotic, physical, globe-entire sovereign territories and massive physical weights and shrink them into neat, standardized text blocks?
Through the rigorous, unforgiving application of abbreviations and prefixes. This is where language meets geography, logistics, and physics.
Let's start with geography. The source gives a list of United States state and territory abbreviations. We all know the states, but looking at the territories is fascinating.
The codes are very specific.
American Samoa is AS. Federated States of Micronesia is FM. Guam is GU. Marshall Islands is MH. Palau is PW. Puerto Rico is PR. Virgin Islands is 6th.
These two-letter postal service abbreviations are a marvel of mid-century logistical design constraints.
I always look at the brutal efficiency of it. You take a sprawling, beautiful place, an entire nation of islands spanning 1 million square miles of ocean like the Federated States of Micronesia, which has so much poetry and history in its name, and you legally condense its entire identity down to just 2 letters, FM.
It feels almost violent.
It does, but it fits perfectly into a tiny box on an envelope.
It was born entirely out of technological constraint. In 1963, the U.S. Postal Service introduced the ZIP code to handle the exploding volume of mail. But the early computers and punch card databases they used had severely limited memory.
So they couldn't just use whatever abbreviation they wanted.
No, they simply did not have the bytes to store the traditional abbreviations like Mitch for Michigan or Mass for Massachusetts. Every single state and territory had to be reduced to exactly 2 characters. No periods, no variations.
But solving that puzzle must have been a nightmare because of collisions. Why isn't Alaska just AL?
Because Alabama is AL. Think about the states that start with M, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Assigning unique 2-letter identifiers without overlap, while keeping them somewhat intuitive, was my massive puzzle. Alaska became AK, Arkansas became AR, Arizona became AZ. It strips away the romance of the name, but it enables the global supply chain.
And for a designer formatting a massive list of addresses, those 2 locked letters are a godsend. They guarantee uniform column widths.
Uniformity is the ultimate goal.
which leads us to the Weights and Measures Abbreviation Guide. The source provides a fascinating side-by-side comparison of U.S. customary measurements and international metric measurements. Looking at the U.S. side, we have mile abbreviated to mi, yard to yard, foot to heft, inch to in, pounds to pound, ounces to ounce, gallon to gal.
And notice the metric side. Kilometer is kilometer, meter is m, centimeter is meter, millimeter is millimeter, kilogram is kilog, liter is L, milliliter is ml.
The metric system is intrinsically more systematic, but notice a crucial typographical difference here. Liter is a capital L, and milliliter is a lowercase m, followed by a capital L. Why the subtle use of a capital letter in the middle of a measurement abbreviation?
That capitalization is a survival mechanism.
How so?
In many traditional fonts, lowercase l looks absolutely identical to the Arabic numeral 1. So if you write 1 L of water using lowercase l, visually, it looks exactly like 11 of water.
Oh, that's a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. To avoid that catastrophic visual collision, the international scientific community adopted the capital L. Again, the typography alters itself specifically to protect the integrity of the data.
That brings us to the final piece of the matrix: common prefixes, the mathematical scale of our world. The source lists specific prefixes and their symbols. Mega is represented by a capital M, and its factor is 1 million mil. Kilo is a lowercase k, factor 1,000. Centi is a lowercase c, factor 1,100. Milli is a lowercase m, factor 11,000.
This is perhaps the most important point regarding case sensitivity in the entire world of design.
Why is that? I mean, I know an M is an M. If a designer decides to use an all-caps font for aesthetic reasons, who cares?
Think about the difference between the capital M for mega and the lowercase m for milli. They are on opposite ends of reality.
One is a million times a unit, the other is 1,000th of a unit.
Yes. So if you are a designer laying out a dosage chart for a hospital or an engineering schematic for a power grid, the case of that letter is literally a matter of life and death.
If a doctor prescribes 5 megawatts of power instead of 5 milliwatts because a designer capitalized the M to make a brochure look punchier,
the consequences are lethal. If you write 5 ml of medicine with a capital M, you might be legally specifying 5 megaliters, 5 million liters, instead of 5 milliliters.
That's terrifying.
We talked about the Mariner 1 explosion earlier. Well, in 1999, NASA lost the Mars Climate Orbiter, a $125 million spacecraft. It burned up in the Martian atmosphere.
Another typo.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
The engineering team at Lockheed Martin provided thrust data in U.S. customary units pound-force-seconds, but the NASA navigation team assumed the data was in metric units Newton-seconds.
Oh no.
The mismatch in the specification language caused the ship to fly too low.
A typographical translation error burned up a spaceship.
When you are designing data, you are not just making things look pretty. You're managing the parameters of physical reality. The letters are vessels for absolute, unyielding values.
You cannot compromise the accuracy of a prefix for the sake of a font style.
Never. The lowercase mem must remain lowercase, no matter what the creative director wants. The designer is the custodian of the information.
Which brings us to the end of our incredibly deep journey through Chapter 3. Let's synthesize what we've unpacked here today. We started at the macro rules of language, understanding the cognitive load that dictates when to write out the word 10 versus using the digits 1 and 0, and why we use hyphens, N dashes, and M dashes to control the flow of thought.
We explored how we bend the abbreviations of modern time around the ancient Latin grammar of Anno Domini.
We zoomed all the way down into the microscopic, secret red pen handshakes of the editor, the loops, the carets, the physical lead blocks, and the shepherd's crooks that evolved from metal printing presses to dictate the behavior of our modern digital software.
We anchored our pages with the heavy, visual full stop of the footnote period, honoring a sequence of asterisks and daggers that predates the computer by centuries.
And finally, we looked at how we standardized the chaos of the physical world, shrinking sprawling oceans and millions of units down into precisely capitalized two-letter logistical codes.
It is vital to remember why all of this matters to you, the listener. Being well-informed isn't just about memorizing historical trivia or knowing the capital of a state.
It's about actively noticing the invisible scaffolding of the information you consume every single day of your life.
Exactly. Every news article you read, every financial chart you analyze, every dosage label on a medicine bottle is governed by these exact rules. When you understand the rule book, You transition from being a passive consumer of text to an active observer of structure.
You see the intent behind the layout. And once you see these rules, missing apostrophes, the optical alignment of quotes, the crucial capitalization of prefixes, you truly can never unsee them.
You become a permanent typographic detective.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. We've seen how these typographical rules and proofreading symbols, the carré, the stet, evolved from monks writing manuscripts in scriptoriums, to typesetters working with heavy lead blocks, to the digital word processors we use on our glowing screens today. The underlying concepts survived every single technological leap.
They adapt.
Right. So as we move rapidly into an era of AI-generated spatial computing, where we might be reading text in 3D virtual reality environments, walking around blocks of data, or interacting with holograms, what will the proofreading symbols of a 3D hologram look like?
That is a fascinating question. If text has physical depth, how do you edit the z-axis?
Will the mighty stets survive the leap into the metaverse? How will we mark an M- in thin air? It's something to think about the next time you put on a VR headset. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly detailed journey through the matrix of text.
It's been great.
As always, please remember to subscribe so you don't miss our next exploration. And again, scan the QR code on your screen or click the link in the description to get your own physical copy of the Graphic Design Reference Plus Specification book.
It is the ultimate decoder ring.
It really is. Until next time, remember, the next time you're reading a book or a website and it feels perfectly frictionless, perfectly transparent, like a clean window, take a second to stop and look closer. Appreciate the fingerprints, the scaffolding, and the precise and visible architecture that made that perfectly clear view possible.